This forgotten 1912 portrait reveals a truth that changes everything we thought we knew. Dr. Marcus Webb had been working as a digital archivist at the Chicago History Museum for nearly a decade, and he believed he had seen every type of historical photograph imaginable. But on a cold morning in March 2024, while sorting through a recent donation from an estate sale on the South Side, he came across an image that made him stop breathing. The photograph was a formal wedding portrait, professionally taken and dated on the back in faded ink, June 15th, 1912. Its quality was remarkable for its age: sharp focus, careful composition, proper lighting. A young couple stood before what appeared to be a small church. The bride wore an elaborate white gown with lace sleeves and a long veil. The groom stood beside her in a dark suit, with a high collar and boutonniere. What stunned Marcus was not the technical quality, but the couple themselves. The groom was white, perhaps in his late 20s, with pale skin visible even through sepia tones. The bride was black, her dark skin unmistakable, her expression calm and resolute, as her hand rested in the crook of her husband's arm. They stood close, dignified, unafraid. Marcus carefully set down his coffee, his hands trembling. He had studied American history extensively. His dissertation focused on social customs in the early 1900s, and he knew with absolute certainty that this photograph should not exist. In 1912, 30 states enforced laws banning marriage between black and white citizens. These anti-miscegenation statutes carried harsh punishments: fines, imprisonment, annulment, even charges of fornication or adultery. In the Deep South, interracial couples often faced violent mob retaliation. Yet here was photographic evidence of a marriage openly documented in a professional studio. No fear in their faces, only solemn pride. The back of the photograph offered only 2 handwritten names: William and Grace, our wedding day. No surnames, no further clues. Just 2 people who defied one of the most dangerous boundaries in America. Marcus placed the photo into an archival sleeve and began photographing it from multiple angles. He understood immediately that this discovery could rewrite historical assumptions about interracial relationships in the early 20th century. Over the next week, he immersed himself in research on J. Morrison photography, the studio stamped on the back. Through city directories, business registries, and old newspapers, he learned that the photographer, James Morrison, had operated a studio on South State Street in a racially diverse district of Chicago. Morrison was known as a progressive who served white and black customers alike, unlike most studios of that era. A 1916 Chicago Urban League record even listed his business as one that welcomed all clients with dignity. Suddenly it made sense. William and Grace had chosen Morrison because he was one of the few photographers who would not refuse to document their marriage. Marcus eventually located Morrison's great-granddaughter, Patricia, who invited him to examine her ancestors' records, boxes of ledgers and journals she had never fully reviewed. In her dining room, Marcus carefully turned through pages until he found it. June 15th, 1912. Wedding portrait. W. Patterson and G. Johnson. $5. Then he opened the journal. Today I photographed a wedding that may be one of the most important of my career. Mr. William Patterson, a white bank clerk, and Miss Grace Johnson, a colored school teacher, came to document their marriage. They wed only hours earlier at a small church willing to perform such a ceremony. They traveled from Mississippi to marry here, for their home state forbids such a union. They plan to return and live as employer and employee in public, though they will be husband and wife in truth. The photograph is for them, proof of what the world must never see. Marcus sat frozen. William and Grace had traveled hundreds of miles to marry legally in Chicago, only to return to Mississippi, a place where their love was not only forbidden, but potentially fatal. They would have to pretend to be strangers in public, live separate on paper, hide what mattered most. Their courage was unimaginable. Marcus knew he had to learn what became of them, whether they survived, whether their secret life endured. Armed with their names and the journal's details, he traveled 2 weeks later to the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. There, with the help of a specialist named Thomas, he began combing through racially segregated records, separate census logs, separate directories, separate worlds. Finally, after days of searching, they found him. William Patterson, hired September 1912, First National Bank of Clarksdale, Mississippi, listed as unmarried, aged 27. Clarksdale was a small delta town ruled by cotton plantations, Jim Crow laws, and violent segregation. It was perhaps the most dangerous place imaginable for an interracial couple attempting to build a life, especially one lived in the shadows. Yet, the records confirmed William had settled there just 3 months after his Chicago wedding. Marcus and Thomas then searched for Grace Johnson in Clarksdale's colored records and found her listed as a teacher at the Clarksdale Colored School beginning in 1913. She lived on the edge of town, while William's address, according to his bank employment files, was across Clarksdale in a white residential neighborhood. Publicly, they led separate lives, exactly as Morrison's journal predicted. Yet there they were, both in Clarksdale, both listed as unmarried, maintaining the fiction of being strangers, while secretly bound as husband and wife. Marcus traced their lives through decades of archived documents. William remained at the bank for 18 years and eventually became assistant manager. Grace taught at the colored school for over 30 years. Neither ever appeared married to anyone else. Neither had children noted in census records. Then in 1925, Marcus found something that shifted everything. William Patterson had purchased a small house on the outskirts of town, in a marginal area between white and black districts. Later, tax assessments noted auxiliary dwelling and servant quarters, suggesting additional buildings had been added. Marcus understood instantly. William had created a private space where he and Grace could live together in secret, a place where their illegal marriage could exist behind closed doors, beyond the reach of a society that would destroy them if the truth emerged. He drove north to Clarksdale, following the historical address. Flat delta farmland stretched endlessly beneath a dull sky. When he arrived, the town still carried the scars of Jim Crow. The address led him to a weathered neighborhood, many homes abandoned. At a small grocery store, he asked an elderly woman about the old Patterson place. She eyed him with suspicion. "You're not from around here," she said. Marcus explained his research. When he mentioned William Patterson and Grace Johnson, her expression changed. "My grandmother used to talk about a teacher named Miss Grace," she recalled. "Said she was proud, educated, never married. Folks thought it strange. A woman that beautiful living alone so long." She paused. But maybe she wasn't alone after all. She directed Marcus to the property, warning that it was collapsing and scheduled for demolition. 20 minutes later, Marcus stood before a decaying house drowning in overgrowth. Behind it, through brambles and vines, stood a smaller building. Inside that smaller structure, he found something extraordinary. On the wall, carved inside a heart, were the initials WP plus GJ. This had been their sanctuary, their home, the one place where William and Grace could live as husband and wife. Marcus stood in that silent room, fingertips pressed to the century-old carving, feeling the presence of two people who had loved each other in defiance of the world. Still, one question remained. What happened to them? Determined, Marcus continued his search. His next stop was the old Clarksdale Colored School, now a community center. The director, Evelyn, led him into a storage room piled with unorganized archives. Among faded gradebooks and attendance lists, Grace Johnson's name appeared year after year from 1913 to 1947, always accompanied by notes praising her dedication, intelligence, and strength. Then Marcus found a small, ribbon-tied bundle of letters. Every letter was addressed to Grace Johnson, and every sender line read, W. Patterson. His hands trembled as he opened the first, dated October 1913. My dearest Grace, how strange to write when we sleep beneath the same roof, yet must live as strangers in the light of day. I write because some things are too dangerous to speak aloud. I do not regret our marriage, not for one moment. You sacrificed more than I, leaving Chicago for Mississippi because I could not leave my aging parents. Your love humbles me. Letter after letter revealed the emotional reality of their hidden marriage. William wrote of the agony of pretending not to know her in town, the fury of hearing men speak about her with condescension, while he stood silent, powerless to defend his wife. The letters spanned decades, love documented quietly, privately, faithfully. One letter from 1920 described a terrifying night when men came to William's property, fueled by rumors of unusual living arrangements. William thought their secret was discovered. He prepared to defend Grace with his life. But the men were only hunting bootleggers during Prohibition. They left, unaware of the far greater secret they almost uncovered. Afterward, William wrote that they must be even more careful. Never and nowhere could they risk being seen as more than strangers. The final letter, dated December 1946, 34 years after their wedding, held shaking handwriting. My beloved Grace, the doctor says my heart is failing. I have little time left. Despite the shadows, the fear, the lies we told for survival, sharing my life with you has been my greatest joy. I have arranged for the house to pass to you quietly. Everything I have is yours, as it always should have been. You are my wife, even if Mississippi never allowed the world to know. Marcus wiped his eyes, overwhelmed. Their love survived decades in silence, hidden but unbroken. Marcus searched for William Patterson's death certificate and found it dated February 1947. Cause of death, heart failure, age 62. The document listed him as unmarried with no next of kin, a final denial of the marriage he had maintained secretly for 35 years. Grace had lived another 12 years after William's death. Marcus found records showing she continued to teach until 1952, when she finally retired at 63. She remained in the house William had left her, the property legally transferred to her as a bequest to a loyal employee, just as William had arranged. Marcus discovered her death certificate, dated March 1959. She had died at age 70, also of heart failure, in the same house where she and William had spent decades together in hiding. Like William, her official records listed her as unmarried, with no surviving family. But in the records of the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Clarksdale, Marcus found something different. Grace's funeral had been well attended. Dozens of former students and their families came to pay respects. A church bulletin included a brief memorial. Miss Grace Johnson was a devoted teacher who touched countless lives and lived with quiet dignity and purpose. Marcus interviewed several elderly Clarksdale residents whose parents or grandparents had once been Grace's students. They remembered her as an exceptional teacher, strict but caring, who believed education was a path to dignity and freedom. One woman, now in her 80s, had been among Grace's last pupils. Miss Grace was different, she said. She seemed sad sometimes, like she carried a heavy weight, but she gave us everything she had. My mother always thought Miss Grace had loved someone long ago, but couldn't be with him. I guess she was right, but not the way she imagined. Marcus asked whether anyone had gone through Grace's belongings after her death. The woman explained that Grace had left instructions for her possessions to be given to former students through the church. Her personal papers had been boxed and stored in the church basement. With the pastor's permission, Marcus spent an afternoon there searching through boxes unopened for decades. He found lesson plans, certificates, student photographs, and letters from grateful families. Then, at the bottom of the final box, inside a small wooden container, he found what he hoped for: Grace's personal journal. It covered the years 1912-1958, written sporadically, mostly during emotional or meaningful moments. Marcus turned to an entry from June 15th, 1912, Grace's wedding day. "Today, I married William in Chicago. We stood before God and witnesses and made vows that Mississippi says are illegal, that our families would call shameful, that could get us killed if discovered. But I have never been more certain of anything. William is my husband. I am his wife. No unjust law can change that truth." Her journal revealed their hidden life, the secrecy, the danger, the tenderness. She wrote of having to address her own husband as Mr. Patterson in public, of fearing that even a glance might expose them. One entry described a painful moment. Grace stumbled on a sidewalk one day, and William instinctively reached to steady her, then pulled away just as quickly. A white woman witnessed it and remarked sharply about improper familiarity. William had apologized loudly, pretending to be offended. Grace walked away, trembling, while William stood frozen, forced to deny her publicly. "I know why we must do this," she wrote that night. "I know the danger, but it tears at my soul to see him pretend contempt for me, when in his heart I am everything. We pay such a price for love." And yet there were moments of quiet joy, sharing dinners, reading together, speaking freely only behind closed doors. In 1918, the influenza pandemic nearly took William. Grace nursed him in secret, terrified she might lose him without even the right to mourn him. "If William dies," she wrote, "I will lose not just my husband, but any proof that our marriage existed. I will have to stand silent while my heart breaks." But William survived, and their secret life continued. Through the 1920 and 1930, Grace wrote of contentment, her love for teaching, and William's small, everyday tenderness. Marcus was struck by her strength. She accepted a life without public recognition, yet her words carried no bitterness. Near the end of the journal, in 1958, Grace wrote of the wedding photograph, the image that began Marcus's investigation. "I have kept our wedding photograph hidden for 46 years. When William died, I nearly destroyed it. But I could not erase the evidence of our love. It is proof that we were real. I have given it to someone who understands, someone who will keep it safe until our story may be told without shame." Marcus realized the photograph must have passed through generations before emerging at the estate sale where he found it. Someone had guarded it for decades. Back in Chicago, he located the family whose estate sale it came from. The estate had belonged to a woman named Dorothy, who had died at 98. Her granddaughter helped settle her belongings and agreed to meet Marcus. "We found boxes of old pictures and documents," she said. "We didn't recognize any of it, so we sold it to the estate company. Why is something important." Marcus showed her the photograph of William and Grace. The granddaughter examined it and shook her head. She didn't recognize the couple. Then she paused. "Wait," she said slowly. There was a letter tucked inside one of the albums. Marcus searched for William Patterson's death certificate and found it dated February 1947. Cause of death: heart failure. Age 62. The document listed him as unmarried with no next of kin, a final denial of the marriage he had maintained secretly for 35 years. Grace lived for another 12 years after William's death. Marcus found records showing she continued teaching until 1952, when she retired at age 63. She remained in the house William had left her, legally written as a bequest to a loyal employee, exactly as he had arranged. Marcus then located Grace's death certificate, dated March 1959. She had died at age 70, also of heart failure. in the same house where she and William had spent decades together in secrecy. Like William, her official records listed her as unmarried, never married, no surviving family. But the truth lived elsewhere. In the records of the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Clarksdale, where Grace had been a member, Marcus found that her funeral had been well attended. Dozens of former students and their families came to pay their respects. A church bulletin noted that Miss Grace Johnson had been a devoted teacher who touched countless lives and lived with quiet dignity and purpose. Marcus interviewed elderly residents whose parents or grandparents had been Grace's students. They remembered her as strict but caring, believing deeply in education as a path to dignity and freedom. One woman, now in her 80s, had been among Grace's last students. Miss Grace was different, she said. She seemed sad sometimes, like she carried a heavy weight, but she gave us everything she had. My mother once told me she thought Miss Grace had loved someone long ago, but couldn't be with him. I guess she was right, just not in the way she imagined. Marcus asked if anyone had gone through Grace's belongings after she died. The woman explained that Grace had left instructions that her possessions be distributed among former students at the church. Her personal papers had been boxed up and stored in the church basement. With the pastor's permission, Marcus spent an afternoon searching through boxes untouched for decades. He found lesson plans, certificates, student photographs, letters from grateful families, and then, in a small wooden box at the bottom of a container, he found what he had been hoping for, Grace's personal journal. The journal spanned 1912 to 1958, written sporadically during moments of emotional weight. One entry, dated June 15, 1912, her wedding day, stopped Marcus cold. Today, I married William in Chicago. We stood before God and witnesses and made vows that Mississippi says are illegal, that our families would call shameful, that could get us both killed if discovered. But I have never been more certain of anything. William is my husband. I am his wife. No unjust law can change that truth. The journal revealed the emotional landscape of their hidden marriage, the pain of pretending to be strangers in public, the fear that a glance too long could destroy them. In one 1915 entry, Grace described stumbling on an uneven sidewalk in town. William instinctively reached to steady her, then recoiled, remembering where they stood. A white woman saw and made a cutting remark about improper familiarity. William had to perform outrage, playing the role of an insulted white man. Grace walked away shaking, knowing her husband had been forced to deny her. "We pay such a price for love," she wrote. Yet the journal also recorded joy. Quiet dinners together, shared books, whispered laughter. In 1918, during the influenza pandemic, William nearly died. Grace nursed him in secret, slipping in and out of their home unseen. She wrote in terror that if he died, she would not even be able to mourn publicly. "Our love may die unseen," she wrote. He survived. Their marriage endured. By the 1920 and 1930, Grace wrote with steadier peace. She found purpose in teaching. William remained gentle, steadfast, devoted. Near the journal's final pages, an entry from 1958 made Marcus sit forward. "I have kept our wedding photograph hidden for 46 years. I cannot destroy it. It is proof that we were real." Grace entrusted the photograph to someone, though she didn't name who. Marcus realized it must have been passed through generations until the estate sale where he'd found it. Someone had kept her secret, kept it safe, until history was finally ready to see it. Marcus tracked down the estate. The granddaughter of the deceased homeowner found a letter, addressed to Dorothy, and dated 1959, in Grace's handwriting. "My dear Dorothy, I am entrusting you with the photograph from my wedding day. Keep it safe. Perhaps someday the world will be ready to know that your teacher, Miss Grace, was married to a man named William, and that we loved each other for 47 years, despite a world that said our love was impossible. Dorothy had been Grace's student. She had kept the secret for a lifetime. Marcus published the story in 2024 as Hidden in Plain Sight, the 47-year marriage of William Patterson and Grace Johnson. It spread like wildfire. Tens of thousands of downloads, national headlines, classroom discussions across the country. The story reopened conversations about interracial love, racism, and the laws that once denied both. But backlash came as well. Hate mail, threats, demands to retract. Still, far more letters expressed gratitude. People sent their own family secrets, marriages hidden, love erased by law. Clarksdale, hesitant at first, eventually honored William and Grace. Their house was preserved as a historical site. A museum and memorial garden were planned. Marcus stood at the dedication, speaking of their courage. They chose each other every day, he said, for 47 years. 6 months later, Robert, William's great-nephew, contacted Marcus. His family had long spoken of a shameful scandal, but never the truth. He brought letters William had written to his brother, never mentioning Grace directly, but hinting at sacrifice, love, exile. William had lost his family to love, but never left Grace. With Robert's letters, Marcus expanded his research into a book, The 47-Year Secret. It became a bestseller, then a documentary. Grace's students and their descendants created scholarships and education programs in her honor. A portrait of Grace, painted from the wedding photograph, now hangs in the Clarksdale district offices. At a scholarship ceremony, an elderly man spoke of his grandmother, taught by Grace. She said, "Dignity lives inside you. No law can remove it." Marcus listened, thinking of the photograph, of two people who had stood in a Chicago church in 1912 and claimed a life they could never fully live in public. Their love had been forced into shadows, but not destroyed. After more than a century, their story finally stands in the light. William and Grace's hidden marriage is hidden no more.